Welcome back. Today, I want to ask you a simple question that leads to a surprising result, I believe, after you listen to this talk. Namely, are you conscious now? Of course you are. You are seeing this video, you listen to the sound of my voice. Your answer will be yes, but it is very hard, though not impossible, to answer truthfully no. So whenever we ask this question, we reply, yes, I'm conscious now. We can ask many times and always get the same answer, making it easy to conclude that life is always like this, that I'm continuously present and experiencing a stream of thoughts and perceptions. So we assume a continuity and unity, which is simply not true. And this talk hopefully will convince you of that. The illusion, however, is so powerful because it is so hard to answer a different question. What is it like the rest of the time? What is it like when I'm not asking, what is it like? So here is Susan Blackmore, whom I was quoting. She's a neuroscientist/philosopher who has written a number of very intriguing books. So she has raised this question, and she states that neuroscience and disciplined introspection give the same answer. There are multiple parallel processes with no clear distinction between conscious and unconscious ones. Consciousness is an attribution we make, not a property of only some very special events or processes. So let's unpack this now in the next couple of slides. So there's a curious thing going on about consciousness, namely looking into consciousness reveals only that it is what it is like when we are looking into it. And most of the time we are not looking into it. So introspecting on our own minds is thwarted by the very fact of introspecting. I want to introduce you to a so-called dolphin model of cognition. And you see the dolphins jumping, either solo, but usually in some kind of a group. They do this in order to swim more efficiently and coordinate with their breathing. As you know, they are air-breathing creatures. Let's show you another similar video. And here you can see a whole bunch of them rapidly coordinating their swimming styles. Again, the appearance and disappearance of the dolphin is what the metaphor is all about. So here is the originator of this dolphin model of cognition. His name is Thomas Metzinger. He is a German philosopher. So he says, imagine you're standing on the prow of a sailboat, watching a school of dolphins leaping left and right. When traveling long distances, jumping saves dolphins energy, he says, because there's less friction in the air and in the water below. It also seems to be an efficient way to move rapidly and breathe at the same time. Typically, the animals will alternate long ballistic jumps with bouts of swimming underwater close to the top for about twice the length of the leap. There might be even more than one dolphin. In all likelihood, there's a whole race going on between our thoughts, a continuous inner competition for the focus of attention and what we finally seize control of, or what finally seizes control over our behavior. So now the dolphins are our thoughts, feelings and impressions that are either conscious or are just subconscious and we are not aware of them. So he says that what most of us still call our conscious thoughts are really like dolphins in our mind, jumping briefly out of the ocean of our unconscious for a short period of time before they submerge themselves again. This dolphin model of cognition helps us understand the limits of our awareness. For example, the windows of time in which these leaps into consciousness unfold, as well as the subsequent underwater processing, vary hugely. And similar to the way that dolphins break the surface of the water, thoughts often cross the border between conscious and unconscious processing and in both directions. So that's the dolphin model of cognition. Now, he says that the point is that the mental contents available to us via introspection are nothing more than momentary flashes of automatic cognitive processing, grinding away beneath the waves of our awareness most of the time. That is the hypothesis that only occasionally surface our cognitions, feelings, and thoughts in such a way that they become available for introspection and becoming aware, that we're becoming aware of them. And he says this raises a strange question. Who is the us standing at the prow and watching these dolphin thoughts scoot past? Now, he believes that this is a big deal, and he says that this finding has radical implications for politics, education, and morality. If we consider the empirical findings, we arrive at a surprising result of profound philosophical significance, namely that cognitive control is the exception, while its absence is the rule. By cognitive control, he means the ability to access at will and to stay with and cogitate on certain selected items that you choose out of your own volition. Much of the time, we like to describe some foundational self, us, as the initiator or cause of our action, but this is a pervasive myth. This self as agent is just a useful fiction, he says, a neurocomputational artifact of our evolved self model. Now, there's a whole bunch in this. We will not totally unravel this today, but this is one of the consequences of the dolphin model of cognition. Now, this is now empirical. For roughly 2/3 of their conscious lives, human beings are not mentally autonomous subjects. Namely, in dreamless sleep, even when you dream in REM sleep, and when you are engaged in mind wandering without realizing this. It's estimated that perhaps 40% of our time is spent with mind wandering that we may not necessarily be aware of at the time. We are just zoned out, but we appear conscious and present. And of course, a great deal of time is spent sleeping. If you add up those times, you wind up with this estimate that we are not autonomous mental subjects for about 2/3 of the time. And this argument is then partly based on recent empirical studies demonstrating the ubiquitous occurrence of mind wandering or spontaneous task-unrelated thought. We want to catch the mind wandering. So mental autonomy then is defined as the ability to control the conscious content of one's mind in a goal-directed way. I want to play you a video here of a discussion, Yuval Harari talking with Sam Harris. Both folks here are meditators and are heavily involved in meditation and has had a discussion about meditation and what it all means and how this has affected their lives.
Vipassana retreat, and I learned Vipassana meditation from a teacher called S.N. Goenka, and it completely blew my mind and changed my life. And ever since that first course, I do 2 hours of Vipassana meditation every day. I usually start my workday with 1 hour of meditation, and I finish it with another hour of meditation. And every year, like my yearly vacation is to go for a long retreat of between 30 and 60 days of just meditation in complete silence, no emails, no computers, no books, no reading, writing, nothing, just meditating.
Oh, that's wonderful. I am envious. Do you have kids?
No, just dogs. Explains a lot.
That explains your freedom. Yeah, that's really wonderful. So just to give people a clearer picture of what you're up to there. So Goenka is a very famous Vipassana teacher. There are two strands of Vipassana that have been very influential, particularly in the West, among all the Westerners who in the 60s discovered this practice. And they both come out of Burma. And Goenka's is one line coming from a teacher named U Ba Khin, and there was another line that came from a teacher named Mahasi Sayadaw. And so all of the Vipassana practice I've done on retreat has come from the Mahasi Sayadaw line, which teaches the same kind of mindfulness, but it's a different sort of practice.
I mean, I think the technical details are less important. The key is just to observe reality as it is, every moment, just to stay focused what is really happening right now, as against all the stories and explanations that our mind constantly generate. And this is extremely difficult. What struck me in my first course, I remember that like the first day I came to the retreat, I was absolutely amazed by it. That it starts with a very simple practice, sounds simple anyway, of you just have to focus your attention on the breath and observe when the breath is coming in and when the breath is going out of your nostrils. That's it. You don't have to do anything. Just observe that. And I couldn't do it for more than like 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and my mind would run away somewhere.
Yeah.
And I was 24 at the time, and it was the first time I realized how little I understand my mind, how little control I have over my attention. And this is why they start with this very simple practice, just focus on the breath, because it's so difficult. And once you get the hang of that and you can do it for more than 10 seconds, then yes, the idea or the instruction is to start observing not just the breath, but everything that is happening in the body, sensations throughout the body. In every part of the body, there is some sensation at any moment. And you start observing that, and you see the deep connection between these sensations and what's happening in your mind. That we think that we react to events in the outside world, to memories from our childhood, to something we saw on television. But in fact, in each and every moment, we constantly react to the sensations within our body. And everything people do, as a historian, I can say that everything people do, from fidgeting in your chair to starting a world war, you're actually reacting to sensations in your body.
It's amazing how out of control our minds are and how few people realize that their minds are out of control. And the consequences of them being out of control are, as you say, these are the same process that gets you to say something untoward in a personal interaction is the very process that brings us, civilizational scale catastrophes.
So you have listened to Yuval Harari telling you how out of control he felt when he went to his first meditation retreat, and how he couldn't control his attention for more than a second or two at a time. So this is the key observation, that unless you sit down and attempt to do a very simple task, such as follow your breath, the in-breath and the out-breath, exclusively, pay attention to it, you don't even know how chaotic your mind is and how little attentional control you really have. In order to illustrate this some more, I'd like for you to do an experiment with me. So here is a piece of music. This piece of music is written by Bach, and he has a very structured technique in this composition. What I'd like for you to try to do is listen to the sound of this bass line as it slowly evolves over time, and observe how long you can do this with full attention, without other thoughts popping into your mind, getting distracted, and being unable to do this. So let's give this a try. Okay, so I wonder how you did and what your observations were. We can increase perhaps the degree of difficulty slightly. So here we have another piece by Bach. Now this is a so-called fugue. The fugue has a subject which reappears all the time throughout the composition. So I will highlight for you the fugue theme with the cursor, and I'd like for you to identify every time when the fugue appears. You have to listen for this brief motif of the fugue, and whenever it calls, identify it and then get ready to identify it again when it reappears. And try to do this without being distracted by many of the other notes and or your own thoughts. So your cognitive task is to identify and then re-identify and re-identify the theme of the fugue. Okay, how did you do? So this was an auditory attention task, but it also, of course, requires other brain areas to be involved other than audition, namely a pattern recognition paradigm, tracking of sound throughout time, rhythm, and so on. So I don't know what your experience is like in this, but when I started my meditation practice a long time ago, I was kind of stunned, just like Yuval Harari, Sam Harris was stunned by the profound chaos that is going on in my head all the time until I settle down and attempt to put things together in a more coherent frame and stay with a subject that I will focus on. And we all do this all the time. So here are the different types of mind-wandering distractions. For example, you sit at your desk in the office and you focus on your task. The numbers here, so you are involved in the task, but you are drifting off, but it is perceptually guided. You are here focused on your task. Now, here, unrelated to the task, you get a phone call. It's ringing. Some sound is occurring. And your mind wanders off. Is this my phone? And all the implications of the phone ringing, of course. Then we have self-generated ideas, but still involved in our task. But it is a terrible task. I hate to do this job, and so on and so forth. Why am I doing this? And then, of course, what takes the crown is the self-generated and task-unrelated mind-wandering. You sit at your computer, you look at the screen, and you think about the beach or the trip to Mexico, and for moments or even minutes, you're not even there. Your boss walks in and he says, "How are you doing?" You said, "Oh, great." And you may have totally forgotten that mind-wandering episode that you were just engaged in. I will now show you a brief video that highlights that there is a dramatic and comprehensive change in brain activity as we transition from a task-oriented focus to just mind-wandering. Now, this is the front of the brain. The blue areas are low brain activity. Red and yellow are high brain activity. Here's the temporal lobe. So this would be the left side of your brain, the left hemisphere. It's a very brief video, but you will see how dramatic and profound and extensive the brain activity map changes as a person transitions from focus, attention to mind wandering. That gives you a sense of how extensive and how dramatic in real time the brain is reorganizing itself according to whether you are with it or whether you are mind wandering. So what does all this have to do with the issue of consciousness? How can we use this finding to analyze the idea of consciousness? There are different models of consciousness. Very famous is William James's idea of the stream of consciousness. So he says consciousness does not appear to itself chopped up in bits. Such words as chain or train do not describe it fitly as it presents itself in the first instance. It is nothing jointed, it flows. A river or a stream are the metaphor by which it is most naturally described. So he says, let's call it the stream of consciousness or of subjective life. So this is where the notion of stream of consciousness comes from. William James, Harvard psychologist, philosopher, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Now, this finding of the transition from being aware and unaware of mind wandering raises doubt about this definition. So there's a philosopher, Galen Strawson, wrote a book, Things That Bother Me, that I would highly recommend. And he says, thought has very little natural continuity or experiential flow. If mind is anything to go by, it keeps slipping from mere consciousness into self-consciousness and out again. It is always shooting off, shorting out, spurting and stalling. William James likened it to a bird's life, an alteration of flight and perchings. Even this image retains strong continuity insofar as the bird traces a spatial, temporally continuous path, and it fails to take adequate account of the fact that trains of thoughts are constantly interrupted by detours, fissures, by-blows, and white noise. So here is Galen Strawson. He makes a big deal out of this, just as Thomas Metzinger. He says, radical disjunction in the process of consciousness don't occur only at the level of content. Switches of subject matter can be absolute and still be seamless in that they involve no sense of temporal gap or interruption in consciousness. It seems to me, though, that the experience of seamlessness is relatively rare. When I'm alone and thinking and consider myself thinking, I find my fundamental experience is one of repeated launches of consciousness that suggest an immediately prior state of complete, if momentary, non-consciousness. The invariably brief periods of true continuity usually seem radically disjunct from each other, even when it's the same thought, or nearly the same thought. It's as if consciousness is continually restarting. It keeps banging out of nothingness. It is a series of comings to. So then how long can we hold it together? There has been some research by Ernst Pöppel, who is a famous researcher, I think out of New York now. They say that conscious now is about 3 seconds long. This is the most we can hold together at any one time. Experientially speaking, in this sense, our ego lasts about 3 seconds. Then it's rebooted with perhaps new content, new feelings, new thoughts, more or less related or unrelated to what has gone before. So it's time now to look more into the fine structure of this phenomenon and return to Judson Brewer. Judson Brewer, also a meditator, works now in Boston, was first at Yale, and is now at the Massachusetts School of Medicine, University of Massachusetts School of Medicine. In the beginning 2000s, studied experienced meditators and looked how are they different, how's their brain activity different from you and I or novice meditators, and he found that this area here called the default mode network, a area of the brain in the midline of the brain, tends to be deactivated in experienced meditators. They can shut this down. And this then has led to the idea that this default mode network is the driving circuit that creates the mind-wandering phenomenon. And what do we mind wandering about? We wonder about the past. We wonder about ourselves and the relationships we have with others. Self-evaluation, self-judging, and we think about the future. Time travel. That's what this machine, this cognitive microchip does in the brain, the default mode network. So he has decided to see whether there are ways to help meditators directly to decrease the default mode network by a kind of biofeedback. But this is EEG feedback. He is wiring up this person. So this is Anderson Cooper, of course. And there are a host of electrodes all over the brain, and this allows him to probe the deeper areas of the brain, in particular the default mode network in the posterior cingulate. Seems to be a key component of mind wandering. And I show you this brief video.
This is just the next generation of exercise. We've got the physical exercise components down. And now it's about working out how can we actually train our minds.
Dr. Brewer is trying to understand how mindfulness can alter the functioning of the brain. He uses a cap lined with 128 electrodes.
We're going to start filling each of these 128 wells with conduction gel.
The electrodes are able to pick up signals from the posterior cingulate, part of a brain network linked to memory and emotion.
This is all just picking up electrical signal from the top of your head.
Since attending the mindfulness retreat, I'd been meditating daily and was curious to see if it had an impact on my brain.
We're going to have you start with thinking of something that was very anxiety-provoking for you.
Okay.
When I thought about something stressful, the cells in my brain's posterior cingulate immediately started firing, shown by the red lines that went off the chart on the computer screen.
Just drop into meditation.
Okay.
When I let go of those stressful thoughts and refocused on my breath, within seconds the brain cells that had been firing quieted down, shown by the blue lines on the computer.
That's really fascinating to see like that.
Dr. Brewer believes everyone can train their brains to reach that blue mindfulness zone, but he says all the technology we're surrounded by makes it difficult.
Okay, so that was Anderson Cooper and Judson Brewer. And you can see this amazing technology that allows you to observe the activity of your posterior cingulate in response to mindfulness meditation, and also to see when mindfulness is lost, that the activity of the posterior cingulate increases. So here is another slide of this. You see a novice meditator has trouble, the posterior cingulate is quite active. And only here in run number 4, the subject says, it felt a lot more relaxed, like I was less of a struggle to prevent my mind from wandering. And you can see here the decreased activity of the posterior cingulate. Here's an experienced meditator stating that focus on the breath, and in particular the feeling of interest, wonder, and joy that arises in conjunction with subtle mindful breathing. So that's the signal from the brain, and it corresponds to this absorption and a successful meditative state in this particular subject. So here is then a summary of this result. You can have a baseline task and then meditate with real-time feedback. And the area of interest, of course, is the posterior cingulate cortex, as you have seen. And the finding is that meditators are much better able to decrease the signal strength from the posterior cingulate and novice meditators. Here's another setup. The result is the same. Meditators do much better than novices. And there's an interpretation of this finding by Thomas Metzinger, who says, it seems obvious that mind wandering simply is the phenomenal awareness of a local bodily process, namely the activity of the posterior cingulate cortex. What the Buddhist meditator attends to is the activity in the neural correlates for mind wandering, the dynamics of a local physical process. Exactly right. So here's the neuroscience, meditation, and the close phenomenal observation of your content of consciousness all come together and form a coherent picture with explanatory power. Now, should you start meditating, perhaps to tap into this experience? If you do, I want to put a pitch in here for Sam Harris's app, Waking Up Guided Meditation. He has quite a knack to guide you verbally to try different meditation techniques, but he never exceeds 10 minutes. He says, you have 10 minutes. If you give me 10 minutes a day, you will make progress and you will find very interesting things about your mind, and you may reap some benefits from this technique. So this is then how it goes. We have mind wandering, Then we become aware, we detect a target that we should be attending to, and we shift our attention back, let's say, to the breath. Now we are in a focused state. That's our goal state. Follow your breath. Before too long, mind wandering occurs again. We become aware of it and detect it. Redirect to the breath and achieve our focus state again. You can see all this happening in the brain. So there is a button press experiment. You push a button when you become aware that your mind has wandered. And the awareness of the mind wandering having happened is displayed in the so-called salience network here in green in the brain. It lights up the moment you discover, oh my God, my thoughts have drifted. And you indicate that awareness by pushing a button. Now you want to shift again to your target, which may be attending to the breath. And this requires some executive function, attention concentration, frontal lobe function and parietal lobe function. And they, of course, light up. And then before you know it, you're back in the focus state where you have low, no activity going on here in the medial network. And bam, here the mind wandering occurs again. And you can see that the activation has occurred. So again, we have focus, become aware of wandering, shifting again, and we compare this to mind wandering. So the awareness of mind wandering uses the salience network, and shifting and maintaining attention uses the executive network. So it's not just the default mode network and the precuneus. It's several different brain areas in concert that get you back and forth from these different states of mind. Okay, so far so good. Now, one sideline, one additional point to make here, and that is we live in very peculiar times. Buddhist monks did not have iPhones, neither did they have apps or the World Wide Net, nor did they have likes on Facebook. There is now a phenomenon of Facebook addiction, where in particular adolescents become very much impressed by how many likes they receive from their peers. Adolescence being a time when peer connection and peer approval is of primary importance. And guess what? The precuneus here is heavily involved in this particular comparing yourself, judging yourself, in this case, viewing Instagram feeds. And as a result of this, what you can show is that adolescents have a adjusted odds ratio of depression, how likely it is that they experience depressive symptoms that is highly correlated with how frequently they check their Instagram feeds or their Facebook likes. How do they rank among their peers? So there's now this Facebook addiction disorder. Now, it's not just adolescents. I think many of us also check our Gmail, check our various accounts on our phones very frequently. And you can show that the more frequently you do this, the more scattered and fragmented your mind will be. We find it more and more difficult to read a big fat book, concentrate on a novel, because everything is served in clickable items in small bite size on the internet. Even listen to a talk like this and follow a line of argument has become more and more difficult. So Metzinger says, for those of us willing to face up to these facts, mind wandering creates a host of new normative issues. It challenges the widespread background assumptions held in economics and political philosophy, and all of which is profoundly relevant for applied ethics and policy making. And then he goes on to say, climate change, predatory capitalism, and religious fundamentalisms really are only surface phenomena because the human actions leading to them are determined by the deep structure of our minds, the functional architecture of our culturally embedded brains. The real challenge is not climate change as such. The true problem humankind must confront are the inbuilt features of our own mind, such as systematic rationality and empathy deficits, self-deception, and the extreme vulnerability of the inner mechanisms creating mental autonomy. Mental autonomy is at risk in our society, always has been, but perhaps more profoundly now. Thank you for your attention. I hope this was a useful survey. You might want to go to our website and look at all the papers and articles that support the claims and the stories that I told you here today. www.behavioralhealth2000.com. And we'll see you soon again for another talk from our company. Thank you.